Part 1, Shadows Over the Lakefront. When the Michigan lake swallowed the last light of the night, Ethan Cole knew the devil he buried had come back to breathe. The wind carried a metallic chill, sharp enough to remind him that time didn't wash away blood. It only diluted it until you learned to live with the taste. The city stretched behind him, glass and steel glimmering through the fog, indifferent and eternal. Chicago didn't change. Only the ghosts rotated. He stood by the yellow tape near the pier, his hands in his coat pockets, the smell of rain and diesel mingling with the scent of death. The body lay on the rocks, one arm twisted, hair slick with lake water. The forensics team moved like tired ghosts, cameras flashing like dying stars. He didn't need to see her face to know what the case meant. A thin silver necklace around her throat caught his eye, engraved with 2 letters, E.M. His chest tightened. The letters glowed under the flashlight like an accusation. The detective from Homicide, a kid in his 30s with nervous hands, muttered something about mugging gone wrong. Ethan tuned him out. There was nothing random about this. Not here. Not tonight. The lake didn't give back bodies unless it wanted to send a message. He lit a cigarette and watched the smoke blur into fog. 20 years. That's how long it had been since the last girl with that same necklace had disappeared. Emma Monroe. The case that ended his badge, his marriage, and whatever faith he had left in the word justice. He told himself the past was just a locked drawer, but sometimes drawers open on their own. A voice broke through the hum of radios. Ethan turned. She stood there in a long coat, hair tied back, notebook in hand, eyes sharp enough to cut through the haze. Clara Reyes. The Tribune still hadn't fired her then. He felt a faint twitch in his pulse. Not affection, just memory. A flicker of something he once tried to believe in. Clara said she was covering the Lakefront case, but her tone told him she already knew who the dead woman reminded him of. She asked questions, the kind that dig under skin. He gave short answers, none of them honest. They both pretended not to notice the way the fog closed in, swallowing their words. Later, alone in his car, Ethan watched the waves crash against the wall of the pier. The glow of the city pulsed in the distance, steady as a heartbeat. He turned the necklace over in his gloved hand. E.M., he still had the photo of Emma Monroe from 2005 in a drawer at home. He didn't know why he kept it. Maybe because it was the only proof that once he'd tried to save someone. He drove through the sleeping city, past the rusted bridges and the steel veins of the L train tracks. The rain slicked the streets in reflection. Every puddle, another mirror he didn't want to look into. He parked in front of his apartment on Halsted, 3 floors up from a closed jazz bar. Inside, everything smelled like coffee gone cold and old paper. He poured a drink, turned on the old tape recorder he sometimes used to think out loud. His voice, rough from smoke and silence, filled the room. The pattern's back, he said. The lake, the jewelry, the timing. It's not over. I think it never was. He played the old police file in his mind like a movie he'd seen too many times. Emma Monroe, 24, architecture student, vanished after her night shift at the Lakefront Towers construction site. They found her bag, not her body. The case went nowhere. Internal affairs went everywhere. Ethan pushed too hard on the wrong people, city developers, a councilman with dirty money, and the department buried him to save itself. Now another body, another necklace, the same letters. At dawn, he went back to the site. The texts were gone, just the quiet and the lake breathing mist. He crouched near the rocks. Something glimmered in a crack between stones. A shard of glass, triangular, edges clean. Not from a bottle. A symbol etched faintly on the surface. An angular shape, maybe a triangle within a circle. Geometric, deliberate. He pocketed it. By afternoon, he was sitting in the archives of the Tribune, Clara beside him, eyes darting across microfilm screens. She said she wanted background, but Ethan knew she wanted the same thing he did, truth, no matter how ugly. They found the old report on Lakefront Towers, the development that was supposed to reshape the Chicago shoreline back in 2005. The project was halted after a series of accidents, collapsing scaffolds, missing workers, bribery whispers. The lead architect, Andrew Mallory, allegedly jumped off his own building before the grand opening. Case closed, tragedy filed away. Mallory. E.M. Ethan felt the blood drain from his hands. He told Clara to pull the photos from the old articles. Mallory's son appeared in one, a teenager at the time, watching the groundbreaking ceremony beside his father. Name, Elias Mallory. A cold pressure formed in Ethan's chest. The initials matched, the timing matched, the revenge pattern fit too perfectly. Clara suggested it could just be coincidence, but her voice faltered. They both knew coincidences in Chicago came with bullets attached. That night, someone broke into Ethan's apartment. Nothing was stolen, but his drawer, the one with Emma Monroe's photo, was open. The picture was gone. In its place, a folded piece of tracing paper. Drawn on it with precise geometric lines was the same triangular symbol he'd found at the lake. Below it, written in pencil, "They're still underneath." Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in the dark, watching headlights crawl across the ceiling, feeling the city breathe through the walls. He thought about calling Morgan, his old captain, but what would that change? Morgan was part of the system that spat him out. Still, by morning, he drove to the precinct. Morgan's office was bigger than he remembered. The man himself looked older, heavier, his gray suit sharp enough to hide the stench of politics. He smiled without warmth when he saw Ethan, said he'd heard about the lakefront body, told him kindly to stay out of it. Old ghosts, he said, aren't good for business. Ethan watched the man's eyes, steady, confident, a little too calm. He knew that tone. It was the tone of someone guarding a secret grave. He left without another word. In the parking lot, Clara waited in her car. She said she'd traced the symbol. It was used by a group of underground urban planners back in the late 90s, a kind of secret fraternity of architects who worked on off-the-books designs, hidden tunnels, floodgates, service corridors under the city. They called themselves the Foundation. Mallory was one of them. Ethan leaned against the car, smoke curling from his lips. The Foundation, he said. Fitting name for something built on corpses. That night, they went to the lakefront again, to the remains of the old construction site. Most of it had been redeveloped into luxury condos, but behind the fencing, the foundation of the original towers still jutted out from the earth like broken bones. Ethan found a locked hatch near the base, rusted but intact. The symbol was carved into the metal. Inside the hatch, stale air breathed up at them. A narrow stairwell led down into darkness. Clara wanted to call for backup. Ethan said there was no one left to trust. They went down. The beam from his flashlight cut through dust and silence. The air smelled of wet concrete and old secrets. The stairs opened into a wide chamber lined with unfinished walls. On the far end, a table, a stack of blueprints, and a single light bulb swaying from a wire. The blueprints bore the seal of the Foundation. Beneath them lay photos, black and white, curling at the edges, construction workers, city officials. One of them was Morgan, standing beside Andrew Mallory. On the wall, written in charcoal, was a phrase, "The water remembers." Ethan's heartbeat echoed in his ears. Clara's hand trembled as she lifted one of the photos. Her flashlight caught something glinting behind the table. A box. Inside it, metal tags, each with initials engraved. EM, LH, JR names, victims. Then, from somewhere deeper in the tunnel, a sound. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, metallic against concrete. Ethan turned off the light. Silence swallowed them whole. He could feel Clara's breath beside him, quick and shallow. The footsteps stopped, then resumed, closer. He drew the old revolver from his coat, the one he promised himself he'd never use again. A faint voice echoed down the tunnel. Calm, precise. You shouldn't have come back, detective. The architect was never one man. The design always needs revision. The light bulb flickered, and in that brief stutter of light, Ethan saw a shadow on the wall. Tall, angular, moving like it belonged to the place. He didn't wait to see the face. He fired once, twice. The echoes cracked through the chamber, then vanished into the lake's heartbeat above. When the light steadied, the shadow was gone. Only the blueprints remained, flapping slightly in the wind that whispered through unseen cracks. Clara grabbed his arm, her voice trembling, asking what they just stumbled into. Ethan stared at the wall, at the words scrawled there like prophecy. The water remembers. Part 2. The network beneath the fog. The next morning arrived colorless, a dull gray that pressed down on the skyline like wet paper. Ethan hadn't slept. The image of that tunnel wouldn't leave his head, the sound of those footsteps, the voice that felt more like an echo from his own memory than something alive. He sat in his kitchen, coffee cold, the old tape recorder still spinning, whispering his notes into the hum. The architect was never one man. The design always needs revision. It kept looping in his mind, like a riddle or a confession. He went back to the site at dawn, but the hatch was sealed. welded shut, new padlocks. No sign of the box, the photos, or the blueprints. Just the lake wind whistling through scaffolds. Someone had cleaned house fast. He found fresh tire tracks leading to the service road, official heavy-grade city vehicles. The department had moved in, or someone pretending to be them. Clara called from the Tribune, voice low, saying the editorial board had spiked her story. Too many legal risks. The paper had suddenly decided the lakefront story was off limits. She sounded more angry than afraid, but Ethan heard the crack beneath her tone. She asked if they were being followed. He told her to assume yes. In Chicago, the truth always came with a tail. By afternoon, he went to see someone he swore he'd never speak to again. Victor Leone, retired internal affairs investigator, the man who'd signed off on his suspension 20 years ago. Leone lived in a condo overlooking the river, still wearing the same cheap cologne that could choke a corpse. He let Ethan in with a smirk, poured whiskey before a word was spoken. They talked like men who knew they'd already lost too much to lie. Leone said he'd heard whispers about the foundation back in the early 2000s. A group of city planners, developers, and architects who used construction projects to funnel money through shell firms. Lakefront Towers was their crown jewel. When the accident started, missing workers, falsified permits. They buried it under layers of paperwork. Mallory tried to expose them, then took a dive off his own building. Or was pushed. Ethan showed him the tracing paper symbol and the note. Leone stared at it for a long time, then said there were rumors Mallory had designed something under the towers, a chamber meant to control the lake's flood systems, but no official records existed. The plans vanished after his death. If someone rebuilt them, they'd need access to old city archives. Not public ones, deep-level infrastructure files off the books. That night, Ethan drove to the old municipal building on Randolph, the one scheduled for demolition. He'd worked there once. He still remembered the back entrance where janitors smoked. Inside, the hallways smelled of mold and paper rot. The lower archives were flooded, ankle-deep in stale water. Files lay scattered like drowned relics. He found the section marked Urban Systems 2004 to 2006. Boxes stacked high, labels fading. He dug until his hands bled from cardboard edges. And then he found it. A folder stamped LT, Project Hydra. Inside, blueprints bearing Mallory's signature, showing not only the tower's foundation, but a labyrinth of tunnels extending under the lakefront, labeled as water control and flood diversion systems. But there were additional markings, handwritten notes in red pencil, annotations not for engineering, but for burial zones. Each mark corresponded to locations where bodies had later washed ashore. He felt the room tilt. Mallory hadn't just built a tower, he'd built a tomb. As he left, he sensed movement in the reflection of the flooded corridor, a ripple that didn't belong to him. He turned, flashlight trembling, beam slicing through water and shadow. No one. But when he reached the stairwell, there was a fresh symbol scratched into the metal railing. The triangle again. Underneath it, a new word, blueprint. He drove straight to Clara's apartment. She lived near the loop on the 10th floor with a view of the river. The city lights swam on her window pane, fractured by rain. She let him in, still half-dressed, papers spread across the floor. She'd been connecting dots, names, dates, property records. Her wall was a map of the city pinned with red strings. He showed her the folder. Her eyes widened. She said it was impossible that these were supposed to be sealed by city order after the redevelopment. They spent hours cross-referencing files, tracing corporate ownership. Every trail led back to one holding company, Mallory Urban Designs LLC, reactivated 3 years ago under new management. Owner of record, Elias Mallory. The sun. At midnight, Clara's power cut out. The hum of the fridge died. The apartment fell into the kind of silence that screams. Ethan moved to the window. Across the street, a parked black SUV idled with its lights off. He grabbed his gun and told Clara to get dressed fast. The elevator was too exposed, so they took the stairs. They hit the street as the SUV's engine revved. 2 men stepped out, suits, earpieces, the usual city muscle. No badges. Ethan fired once into the asphalt. They ducked behind the vehicle. He and Clara sprinted into the alley, splashing through puddles, hearts hammering in sync. They cut through a side door into an old printing warehouse. The air inside was heavy with dust and ink. Ethan pressed Clara against the wall, finger to lips, listening. The footsteps followed, then paused. One of the men spoke softly into a radio, words Ethan couldn't catch except one, "Foundation." The other answered, "The detective is awake." He realized then it was never about covering tracks. It was about containment. The network was alive, still operating, still building. The Foundation had become something larger than corruption. It was an organism feeding on the city's bones. When the men moved deeper into the warehouse, Ethan led Clara out a side exit. They ran until they reached the Riverwalk. The fog thickened, swallowing sound. He stopped beneath a bridge, catching his breath. The steel above dripped condensation like cold sweat. Clara asked if he thought Elias Mallory was behind it. Ethan said maybe. Or maybe the sun was just another piece of the architecture, a face the machine wore to keep building. They found a motel on the south side, one of those hourly places where the sheets smelled of bleach and regret. Ethan took the first watch, gun on the nightstand, staring at the flicker of neon through thin curtains. Clara slept in fits, murmuring fragments of nightmares. Around 4 a.m., he heard a distant explosion from the direction of the lake. The sound rolled through the city like thunder. He turned on the news. A minor gas leak, the anchor said, near the new lakefront condo site. No casualties, authorities investigating. He knew better. The message was clear. Stop digging. By morning, he went to see Morgan again. The precinct buzzed with activity, officers whispering like bees before a storm. Morgan greeted him with false calm. He said he heard Ethan had been stirring up trouble again, chasing ghosts that didn't exist. Ethan dropped the folder on his desk. The blueprints spread like an accusation. Morgan's eyes flicked across them once before he closed the file with deliberate care. "You don't know what you're walking into," Morgan said. "Some foundations can't be rebuilt." Ethan asked if the foundation still operated. Morgan's jaw tightened. He said there were things buried under this city older than either of them, and if Ethan wanted to keep breathing, he'd stop digging. Ethan noticed a small detail on the captain's desk. An engraved paperweight, shaped like a triangle inside a circle. The same symbol. Morgan caught his glance and smiled without smiling. "That's city architecture," he said. "Gift from the department's urban development partners." Ethan left before his anger could speak for him. Outside, Clara was waiting in the car. He told her everything. They drove to the pier, parked facing the lake, the skyline reflected in black water. Ethan said the explosion last night wasn't random. It was a purge, another layer of history erased. He believed there were bodies under the towers, the missing workers, the old victims. All of it sealed beneath the new foundations. Clara said if they could find proof, undeniable evidence, the story could blow the city open. Ethan laughed, not cruelly, just tired. He told her the city was built on proof of corruption, of lies, of survival. It always stands no matter who falls. Still, she insisted they had to try. Her voice carried that stubborn edge that once made him love her. He said fine, one last dive. Literally. That night they met an old diver from the docks, a man who owed Ethan a favor from his police days. For a few hundred cash, he agreed to take them out on his boat near the lakefront construction zone. The lake was ink black, waves slapping the hull. The diver dropped a submersible camera tether into the water. The feed came up on a small monitor, murky at first, then clear enough to show structure. Concrete walls, rebar, submerged tunnels. And then movement. Something pale drifted past the lens, slow, human-shaped. Another and another. Bodies suspended in stillness, hair floating like weeds. Clara covered her mouth. Ethan stared, unable to speak. The diver swore under his breath, said they needed to leave. But before he could reel the camera up, the feed cut out. A flash of light erupted beneath the surface, brief but violent. The boat rocked. A wave slammed the side, nearly tossing them over. When the light faded, the feed was gone. The tether snapped. Ethan looked back toward shore. Sirens wailed somewhere distant. The city kept burning quietly, as it always did. Later, back on the dock, Ethan knelt and touched the water. Cold, thick, unyielding. He realized then the message wasn't about bodies at all. Their still underneath wasn't a threat, it was a truth. The people, the guilt, the past, they were all still under the surface, waiting. As he stood, Clara handed him her phone. An email had arrived from an anonymous address, one attachment, a photo of the blueprints he'd found, marked with a red line circling one section labeled Control Room A. Under it, a single sentence, "If you want answers, come alone." Ethan looked out at the water again, where the reflection of the city trembled like something alive. The wind whispered against his ear, carrying the faint sound of waves or voices. The water remembers. He turned to Clara, said she should stay away from this. She shook her head, eyes fierce. He almost smiled. She was already in too deep. They both were. They left the dock in silence, the city's heartbeat fading behind them, heading toward the lake where the dead never stayed buried. Part 3. The Ghosts Beneath the Lake. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It fell in relentless sheets against the cracked windows of Ethan's apartment, turning the city outside into a watercolor blur of neon and shadow. Every night, he woke to the sound of thunder rolling off the lake, and every night the same image haunted him. A woman's hand breaking the surface of dark water, a flash of the silver pendant marked EM, sinking slowly out of sight. Clara's voice on the phone that morning had been sharp, breathless. "You need to see this," she'd said. No greeting, no explanation. 10 minutes later, she was waiting in a rented car outside his building, coffee steaming between them as they drove into the gray. She didn't speak until they reached the old district by the water, where the abandoned warehouses leaned like tired men against the fog. She pulled out a file folder, its edges frayed and water-stained. "Morgan signed off on the Lakefront Towers project back in 2004, she said, the same year the architect disappeared. These are copies from city archives, blueprints, permits, security contracts. But look at this." She unfolded a map, tracing a gloved finger along the bottom edge. Underneath the towers, sub-basement levels that don't appear on any public plans. Restricted access, construction halted midway and sealed. Ethan stared at the plans. The layout was strange, symmetrical, geometric, circles within squares, lines converging toward a central chamber like veins feeding a heart. "That's not engineering," he murmured. "That's a signature." "The architects?" He nodded. The rain drummed harder on the roof, drowning the hum of the city. He used geometry in all his scenes, as if death itself was part of a design. He called it restoration of order. They broke into the site after dusk. The lakefront towers rose above them, half-completed shells of steel and glass. The security cameras had long since died, their red eyes blind. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of mold and iron. Flashlights cut narrow beams through the dark, catching flakes of dust suspended like frozen rain. At the far end of a corridor, behind a wall of broken concrete, Ethan found it. A rusted hatch, bolted shut, with a warning painted across it in faded black. "Authorized personnel only. Water control system." Clara knelt, brushing away grime. "There's something else beneath the paint." She wiped harder, revealing faintly etched lines beneath, an interlocking pattern of triangles. The architect's mark. It took an hour to pry the hatch open. The hinges screamed like something alive. A cold draft spilled out, carrying the smell of stagnant water and decay. Ethan dropped down first, his boots splashing in shallow puddles. The tunnel sloped downward, walls slicked with condensation, echoing each footstep until it sounded like 100 men walking behind them. "Jesus," Clara whispered. "What is this place?" Ethan swept his light over the walls, symbols carved into the concrete, numbers, coordinates, fragments of words. At one corner, a phrase repeated over and over, gouged deep into the wall. "We build to bury." They reached the end of the passage, a vast underground chamber. The beam of his flashlight caught the edge of something metallic. Rows of metal tables lined the center of the room. On each table lay sealed plastic bags filled with bones. "Bodies," Clara breathed. Her voice was almost lost to the hollow acoustics of the chamber. "Oh my God, how many? Dozens. Maybe more." Ethan's throat tightened. All the missing people from the lakefront disappearances, they never left the site. She turned toward him, pale under the light. "This is it, Ethan. This is what Morgan buried." He walked among the tables, fingers brushing against cold plastic. The tags were dated, 2003, 2004, the same years his life had fallen apart. He stopped at one, labeled with red ink, Case 17B, E. Martinez. The pendant glinted inside the bag, EM. For a moment, the room seemed to close around him. 20 years collapsed into one breath. The rain, the screams, the silence of that night. He had chased ghosts for half his life, and here they were, neatly stacked beneath the city. "Ethan," Clara said, her voice breaking the spell. "There's someone else down here." He turned. A shadow flickered at the far end of the chamber. A figure moved between the pillars, tall, steady, wearing a hooded coat. The sound of boots against water echoed closer. Ethan raised his gun. "Don't move." The figure stopped just outside the circle of light. "You shouldn't have come here, Cole." The voice was familiar, gravelly, calm, the voice of authority. Captain Morgan. The beam of Ethan's flashlight caught his face, older, heavier, but unmistakable. Morgan's eyes were hard and tired, like a man who'd been awake too long. "I told you to let this go," he said. "You don't understand what you're walking into." "I understand enough," Ethan replied. "You knew about the bodies. You helped bury them." Morgan sighed, almost pitying. "You think it's that simple? You think you can dig up the past and everything will make sense?" Clara stepped forward. "You're protecting a murderer." Morgan looked at her. "I'm protecting what's left of this city. You dig deep enough, you find rot everywhere, cops, developers, politicians. The architect wasn't one man, he was a design. And sometimes you have to leave the foundation intact, even if it's built on bones." He drew a gun, slow and deliberate. "Walk away, both of you." Ethan kept his aim steady, though his hands trembled. "If you were going to shoot, you'd have done it already." Morgan smiled, weary. "You still think in rules, Cole. That's why you'll never win." The lights overhead flickered. For a heartbeat, the chamber went dark. When they flared again, Morgan was gone. His footsteps faded into the tunnels. They chased him up through the maze of corridors, the sound of running water growing louder. Pipes burst overhead, raining filth and rust. At the far end, they found a door sealed with chains. On it, scrawled in red spray paint, was another message: "He never left." Ethan ripped the chains free. The room beyond was smaller, circular, with a single chair bolted to the floor. In the chair sat a corpse, desiccated, skin like parchment stretched over bone. A mask of steel covered its face, shaped into perfect geometric symmetry. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "Is that the architect?" The mask caught the light, reflecting their faces. For years they'd believed he'd vanished, fled, or died in the river. But here he was, dead for decades, mummified in his own shrine. Ethan crouched, shining the light over the body. "He's been here the whole time." Morgan wasn't covering for him. He was covering for whoever took his place. A sound broke the silence, faint, rhythmic tapping from the pipes above. Clara's eyes darted upward. "That's Morse code." Ethan listened. Short, long, short, over and over. "They're watching." He backed away slowly. "We need to leave. Now." As they turned, the lights flickered again, then died completely. The tunnel plunged into darkness. Footsteps echoed somewhere ahead, more than one pair this time. Ethan fired blindly toward the sound, the muzzle flash lighting a flash of motion. Figures in black, masks glinting, the same geometric pattern repeating over and over. They ran. Water surged through the tunnels, rising fast. Behind them came the low groan of collapsing stone. Ethan grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her toward the ladder. "Go! Don't stop!" They burst through the hatch into the storm. The tower site was a blur of steel and lightning. Alarms wailed as the structure shuddered. Clara stumbled, coughing, drenched. "What the hell was that?" Ethan looked back at the hatch, now spewing water and steam. "Not ghosts," he said. "A new generation." She stared at him. "You mean?" "The architect never died, he multiplied." Thunder split the sky. In its light, Ethan saw the skyline of Chicago reflected in the lake, sharp, jagged, geometric. For the first time, he realized the truth he'd spent 20 years avoiding. The design was never beneath the lake. It was the city itself. He turned to Clara, soaked and shaking. "They'll come after us now." She met his eyes, defiant. "Then let's make sure the story gets out first." He almost smiled. "That's the thing about stories," he said. The truth never survives the edit. Behind them, the lake roared, swallowing the last of the light. And somewhere below, in the drowned tunnels of the lakefront, the echo of the architect's hammering began again. Slow, patient, precise, rebuilding the city from its own decay. Part 4. When the Mist Lifts. By dawn, Chicago had turned the color of ash. The storm had passed, but the air still trembled with the memory of thunder. Ethan stood on the pier, his coat clinging to his shoulders, watching the lake roll under a bruised sky. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the masked men beneath the towers. Each one identical, each one calm, efficient, like the movement of a machine that had been running long before he was born. Clara was beside him, holding her recorder in her palm. "The servers at Tribune went dark last night," she said quietly. Morgan's people wiped everything, my article, the photos, the blueprints, gone. Ethan didn't look at her. His reflection shimmered on the water, fractured by ripples. They're cleaning house. She exhaled smoke through trembling fingers. So what now? We disappear too? He turned to her. The sleeplessness had hollowed his face, but his eyes were steady. We go back. We finish it. She laughed bitterly. You want to die down there? I already did once. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the smell of the lake, salt, oil, and rain. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara nodded, almost imperceptibly. Then we go together. They broke back into the lakefront site at noon when the workers were gone and the air hung thick with heat. The elevator shaft that once led to the basement had collapsed. They descended through the maintenance tunnel instead, using ropes and a portable light. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. The dripping water echoed like a heartbeat. The lower chamber was flooded halfway up the walls. What had been a labyrinth of steel and concrete was now a ruin. Broken pipes, twisted girders, fragments of the architect's designs carved into every surface. Clara lifted her camera. I can't believe this place even exists, she whispered. It's not a place, Ethan said. It's an idea someone decided to build. They waded through the water until they reached the far wall. Something new had been added since their last visit, a massive steel door freshly welded into the concrete. A keypad blinked faintly beside it, powered by a generator somewhere deeper inside. Looks recent, Clara said. Ethan pressed his ear to the metal. There was a faint hum on the other side. Machinery. He stepped back, raised his gun, and fired 3 rounds into the lock. The keypad sparked, hissed, and the door creaked open an inch. Together they forced it wider. Behind it was a control room, rows of monitors still flickering with static, cables coiled across the floor like veins. In the center of the room stood a table, and on it a black briefcase. Clara wiped dust from the nearest screen. It flickered to life, showing camera feeds from across the city. Intersections, train stations, rooftops. Every feed bore a timestamp and a set of coordinates. Then the pattern emerged, each location connected to another by a series of glowing lines forming a single, vast geometric figure overlaying the map of Chicago. The architect's symbol, Clara said. Ethan opened the briefcase. Inside was a small detonator, marked with the insignia of the city's utilities department, Department of Water Management, Zone 14. Beneath it, a note written in neat, deliberate handwriting. To rebuild, one must first erase. He looked up. They're gonna flood it, he said. All of it. The tunnels, the records, everything connected to the lakefront. Clara stared at him. That would destroy half the South District. Exactly. Footsteps echoed from the corridor. Voices. Male, calm, methodical. Ethan grabbed the detonator, pocketed it, and motioned for silence. They slipped behind the equipment racks as 3 men entered the room. Each wore the same black coat and mask, identical to the one on the architect's corpse. Protocol Phase 4, one of them said. Seal the lower access points. The captain will trigger the sequence himself. Morgan. Ethan tensed. He could feel the weight of the gun in his hand, but he didn't move. Clara's fingers brushed his sleeve. Wait. The men finished their checks and left. The sound of their boots faded into the tunnels. Clara exhaled shakily. If Morgan's here, he'll be near the control core. That's where the detonator signal routes. Ethan pulled the briefcase close. We stop him. We stop the flood. They moved deeper into the maze, following the faint glow of emergency lights. The sound of running water grew louder, vibrating through the floor. The deeper they went, the more it felt like the city itself was breathing. Inhaling, exhaling, ready to drown its own sins. At the end of the corridor stood Morgan, silhouetted against a massive steel gate that overlooked the underground reservoir. He turned when he heard them approach, his expression unreadable. I told you to walk away, he said. Ethan stepped forward. You think you can erase this? The bodies, the people, everything? Morgan's voice was tired. You don't understand what they built, Cole. The architect's design wasn't about murder. It was control. The geometry beneath this city regulates its power grid, its water systems, its communications, every connection mapped to a formula. You expose it, you break it, and the city collapses. You're lying. I wish I was. He reached for the panel beside him. But it's too late now. Ethan raised his gun. Don't. Morgan looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, faint and sad. You still think you can fix things. He pressed the button. The chamber shuddered. Red lights flared overhead. Somewhere below, turbines roared to life. The sound of rushing water became deafening. Ethan lunged forward, tackling him. The two men crashed into the railing, struggling over the detonator control. Morgan slammed a fist into his ribs. Ethan countered, driving his elbow into the captain's jaw. The panel sparked as they grappled. Clara shouted over the chaos. "Ethan, the fail-safe switch, above the gate." He looked up, a small lever inset into the wall, half buried in rust. Morgan caught his sleeve. "If you stop it, the system overloads. The whole structure will blow." Ethan met his eyes. "Then it ends here." He tore free, leaped for the lever, and pulled. The sound that followed was like the city screaming. The turbines ground to a halt, the red lights flickered, then every circuit in the room exploded at once. A wall of white heat tore through the chamber. Ethan felt himself thrown backward, weightless, before everything went dark. He woke to silence. The air was thick with smoke and the taste of metal. Half the chamber had collapsed. Water pooled around him, glowing faintly from broken lights beneath the surface. "Clara?" he called. His voice came out hoarse. No answer. He dragged himself through the debris until he saw her pinned under a fallen beam, her face pale but her eyes open. "You're alive," he breathed. "Barely." She tried to smile, winced. "Did it stop?" He nodded. "Yeah, for now." She looked toward the shattered console. "The story, it's gone, isn't it? Not if someone remembers." Her hand reached for his. "Then remember for me." He froze. "Don't say that." She squeezed his fingers once weakly. "You were right, Ethan. The city doesn't need saving. It needs witnesses." Then her grip loosened. For a long time, there was only the sound of dripping water. Ethan held her hand until it grew cold. They found her body 2 days later when the emergency teams drained the lower levels. Official reports said she died in an accident. Structural collapse, gas leak, no foul play suspected. Morgan's name was never mentioned. Ethan didn't attend the funeral. He watched from across the street, hidden beneath his hat, as the small crowd dispersed. The rain began again, thin and endless. Later that night, he returned to the pier where it all began. The lake was calm, black glass under the city lights. He pulled the detonator from his pocket, the same one he'd taken from the control room, and turned it over in his hand. The red light was still blinking. From the distance, the faint echo of construction filled the air. Steel on steel. Hammers, the city rebuilding itself. He looked out over the water and whispered, "You can't erase the past." Then he tossed the detonator into the lake. It sank without a sound. For a long time, he stood there, smoke curling from the cigarette between his fingers. When he finally turned to leave, a figure watched from the edge of the pier, tall, motionless, wearing a dark coat. The stranger's face was hidden by the mist, but when the wind shifted, Ethan saw the faint glint of metal, a mask, polished, geometric. The figure nodded once, almost respectfully, then vanished into the fog. Ethan didn't follow. He just kept walking, the city swallowing his silhouette as the first light of morning broke over the lake. Somewhere behind him, a headline began to circulate across underground channels, anonymous and untraceable. It bore Clara's final words as its title, "Shadows Over the Lakefront," and beneath it a single line of text, "The design remains."